Thank you, Ms. Sim, for an insightful keynote address. I would now like to introduce our next two speakers. They are Dr. Li Li, Deputy Director, Institute of International Relations at Tsinghua University in China, and Professor C. Raja Mohan, Visiting Research Professor at ISAS. Dr. Li is also a friend of ISAS, as she is currently non-resident senior fellow with the Institute. She is an expert on China-India relations and serves as the Deputy Secretary General of the World Peace Forum and the Chinese Association for South Asian Studies, respectively. Meanwhile, Professor Raja Mohan was the director of ISAS from 2018 to 2021. He is one of India's leading commentators on India's foreign policy and has been associated with a number of think tanks in New Delhi, including the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, the Center for Policy Research, and the Observer Research Foundation. I would now like to invite Dr. Li to speak. Dr. Li, please.
A very good morning. Your Excellency, Minister Ms. Xin An, Dr. Peng, Professor Shipke, and Professor Sylvia, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to have this opportunity to speak in front of such an important gathering. My thanks to the organizers for inviting me. It is believed that China is one of the biggest variables in the transforming world order. Therefore, I guess the distinguished audience might be interested in China's perceptions of the world order, including how China views its own position and what approaches China takes. Actually, the Chinese government has already given out a clear answer that China is committed to, I quote, an equal and orderly multipolar world and universally beneficial and inclusive economic globalization, end of the quote. Put it simple, the two key words are multipolarization and globalization. But what is the exact meaning? I believe it's still the question many people here would raise. So today, I would like to share my personal observation on this question. My remarks will be divided into three parts. First, China and the transition of international system. Second, China and the rules-based world order. Third, China, India, and the global South. In the past decade, there have been many discussions about the international system, about the changes in the world's power configuration. More and more people agree that international system is no more a unipolar one. However, there are still heated debates on where the world is heading for, a bipolar or a multipolar one. The judgment or the expectation of the direction of power configuration usually defines a nation's grand strategy. As far as China is concerned, China has been a strong supporter for multipolarity and a reluctant competitor in the current great power competition. From the Chinese perspective, a multipolar world is a just world that enjoys the democratization of international relations, multilateralism under the UN framework, the equality between nations regardless of their size, the end of hegemony, power politics, and bloc politics, and etc. According to my own observation, China is very cautious about the concept of bipolar or bipolarization, even though there have been some discussions in the academic circle back home. Officials from the Chinese government have kept aloof from such narratives. The reasons might be as follows. On the one hand, the concept of bipolar reminds China of Cold War and hegemony, which China rejects for long. On the other hand, it is also against the reality. China knows her power gap with the US still big in general sense. At the same time, there are also other powers and the rise in the rest, such as India, Brazil, and Indonesia, represents a multipolar world in the making. As far as the US is concerned, to a larger extent, the US strategic shift to great power competition was based on its growing concerns of a bipolar world. Viewing China as the only competent peer competitor to the US hegemony, the US is focusing its resources on checking China. Then comes to the question, is the US dealing with a multipolarized world with a bipolarity-oriented approach? Some shortcomings have already revealed. People are wondering if the Ukraine war and the Middle East crisis are aftershocks or consequences of the US strategic shift. Moreover, the great power competition makes great power cooperation on global issues less possible. That will make the world more vulnerable and exposed to crises such as financial crisis, pandemics, climate change, and etc. The good news may be, as China and the US are engulfed in their mutual competition, other powers, especially middle powers, including ASEAN and Singapore, are provided opportunities to play a bigger role, especially in their own regions. Many power centers will be formed as a result, and multipolarity will be further strengthened. However, for China and other countries in favor of multipolarity, the problem is that peace in a multipolar world cannot be taken for granted. The point I would like to make here is that no matter the world is heading for bipolar or multipolar, we cannot overlook the fact that the world is becoming more and more fragmented. Each nation has the responsibility to facilitate peace and security and prevent the world from more chaos. Then let's move to the second question, China's relations with the rules-based world order. In recent years, there are narratives such as that China is one of the biggest challenges to the rules-based liberal world order, or China is a revisionist to the rules-based world order. To be frank, there are many misunderstandings and misreadings in these assumptions. First, the liberal world order has never been really global. During the Cold War, it worked only in the Western Bloc. It is in the post-Cold War unipolar era that the liberal order became dominant. However, many countries, including China and India, have significant reservations on the liberal order, even if to different extents. Second, even though China has never fully adopted the liberal order, it does make efforts serious efforts to accommodate and get along with the US-led liberal order. Represented by joining the WTO and embracing globalization, China has actually been on board of the liberal economic order. Today, China is still a sincere advocate for economic interdependence and globalization. In the political domain, China emphasizes the central role of the United Nations in global governance and has significant reservations on the liberal political order, especially the Western ideology and US alliance system. Notwithstanding, China has been open to cooperation with the US and its allies within the UN framework to address global challenges such as counterterrorism and climate change. Third, surprisingly, the biggest revisionist of the liberal world order might be the United States itself. In the economic domain, both Trump and Biden have moved away from free trade and tilted to protectionism and even decoupling. In the political domain, Trump 1.0 not only withdrew from a series of multilateral institutions, but also challenged the US alliance system by changing rules in dealing with its allies. It is exactly the point where the worldwide concerns of Trump's coming back arise. So when we are committed to a rules-based world order, we should be clear what rules they are and whether those rules are still functioning well. In a world full of uncertainty, it is urgent for the international community to make joint efforts to safeguard those rules, contributing to peace and prosperity. Finally, I would like to say a few words about China-India relations. China and India are not only the two giants shaping the global economy, but also two defining powers of the future world order. Unfortunately, China and India did not get along well with each other in recent past. In my opinion, it is largely because they are also engulfed in the great power competition. In the US Indo-Pacific strategy, China is the target, while India is the partner. It is very difficult for China not caring about the intensified US-China strategic cooperation, especially in the Indo-Pacific. Despite the dilemma, the consensus is still there that a good and stable China-India relations are in the interests of both sides. The recent thaw between China and India is encouraging, even though it may take time to rebuild mutual trust. As to the so-called China-India competition in Global South, I think it will be verified as a false proposition. Global South, as emerging economies, China and India have shared interests in improving global governance. Global South actually provides an arena for them to cooperate. The expansion and development of the BRICS represents a good example. In conclusion, as a reluctant competitor engulfed in a great power competition, China does not have many options. China has to be prepared for the worst scenario. However, it does not mean that China has changed its independent foreign policy of peace. China is seriously committed to the UN charters and UN authority, major power cooperation, friendly neighborhood, principles of solving disputes through negotiations and peaceful means, economic interdependence and integration, among others. China is also open to new initiatives which can stabilize the world and contribute to peace and prosperity. The above is only my personal views. I hope they are helpful for the audience to better understand where China is and where China may be heading in an evolving global order. I look forward to your comments and criticism. Thank you very much.